Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're logging in from. Welcome to Tuesday Talks. And I'm going to give it 1 second here while people are logging in and making sure we're all streaming in all the places we need to be streaming it. If it's evening for you, I hope you have a nice large glass of water or other refreshing drink. If it's morning for you, I hope you have your cup of coffee. And so you're ready to join for a fun conversation about applications and all that's part of them. And let's see, as we get started, let me go ahead and share my screen so that if you need to go to a different platform, because we know that Zoom sometimes is finicky for some of you. So if you need to go to another platform, here's how you get there. We have 2 different platforms this morning or evening. 小儿通如果需要中文服务的话，如果需要中文翻译可以用小儿通。And we also are live on YouTube. So go ahead and get yourself where you need to be. If something happens with Zoom, you have the backup. So take a screenshot of this or copy and paste. Take a screenshot or scan the QR code. And also, we will be playing Spot Mr. View today. So at any point, Mr. View is going to show up in one of these windows and he is going to do his thing, and you need to take that time and quickly take a screenshot. You're going to take a screenshot. You're going to send the email to contact@initialview.com. I'll type the chat in the chat in a second here. But once you take that screenshot, you email it to us, and then we will send you a prize. So don't miss it because it could happen anytime. It really could happen anytime. And special thanks to all of our sponsor schools. We could not be doing Tuesday Talks without you. So thank you so much for continuing to get the word out, continuing to have your students come and your classmates and friends. And if your school is not on this list and you want to be the first to know about all the Tuesday Talks, please do email me. We would love to make sure you're added. And make sure that you get the information as quickly as possible. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen a little bit here so that we can see our guests' faces. and I'm really honored to have some wonderful colleagues of mine share a little bit about their kind of application reading process. And I know for a lot of you, it's a little bit of a stressful time. And so we just want to be able to have a nice conversation. We want you to ask questions. So if you don't already have your chat box open, you need to have your chat box open and your Q&A box. And remember at Tuesday Talks, we don't wait until the end for a Q&A. I mean, at the end, if that's when you have it, great. But if you have a question right now, the recommendation is that you go ahead and put in the Q&A box right now, because that way we will be able to fold that into our conversation. So thank you so much for doing that. And yes, you can post your questions now. You don't have to wait till after the introduction. You can go ahead and post your questions. But without further ado, welcome to my guests. I'll just go in the order in my screens. Leslie, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Leslie Brott. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Oberlin College, which is located in the Midwest part of the United States in the state of Ohio. So we're right up along Lake Erie, which is one of the Great Lakes. My fun fact, I guess, about Oberlin that I don't think you find on our website is that we have been admitting international students since the year after our founding. So we were founded in 1833. We admitted our first international student in 1834 and have been doing so ever since. So it's been a long time. So I'm really happy to be here with you today.
That is a fun fact that I did not know.
Yes. Awesome. You learn something new every time you do these, right?
And even when I was applying to college, Oberlin was on my list. So that's amazing. Great. Megan.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Rhodes. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm with Colorado College in Colorado Springs, the beautiful southwestern area of the United States. And our fun fact for CC, I think I'll also pivot from Leslie's great year. 1874 was also a great year for us. We had our first international faculty member 3 years after our founding. And then fast forward a few years, and for those who come from China and are familiar with Liang Shirtio and Weni Doa, they both went to Colorado College. So it's a really fun international history as well.
Fantastic. And Audrey.
Hi, everybody. My name is Audrey. I use she, her pronouns. I am working as an associate dean of admission in the Bates office. I'm also an alum of the school, so I graduated about 5 years. So sometimes my own stories slip in as well. My fun fact is also a fun fact for Oberlin, which is that while Oberlin was the first coeducational institution in the US in 1833, Bates was the second in 1855. So that's my fun fact.
Great long
Look at-
histories.
I know. Look at this. I didn't like this is amazing because I think sometimes we'll think of the, some larger private universities as kind of the oldest institutions in the US, but it's so great to hear about like these great liberal arts colleges having such long histories as well. Wonderful. Well, as we always do, we do a quick poll in the beginning of our Tuesday talk. So you'll see open up. If you don't see it, I think you should see it right now. We would love to know who you are. Oh, and while you're doing the poll, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Gloria. I'm one of the co-founders of Initial View, host of Tuesday Talks. Thrilled to be here as usual, and always really, really glad to have authentic conversations with admissions officers and students and counselors. So thank you for joining us. And we're doing this poll right now to see where you are, and I'm excited because it does look like that quite a few of you are in the process right now. You are like, either you've already started your Common App, you've already opened it up, you've already started writing your things. And so that's great because that helps us to know how much of a focus we should make on the components of the application. Glad to see that there's some parents here as well. Welcome, and some counselors and other teachers. So that's great. All right, so we're going to start with a couple chat questions because I love getting you all involved. And I know it always takes a minute or so for people to get warmed up. So I'm going to start off with this. What do you think is the most important component of the application? Given that there are several of you who are seniors who have already kind of started. And when you look at your materials, as you open up your computer and you open like, what do you think is the most important component of the application? I'm going to make sure people can actually chat into the box. Sometimes they cannot. So, all right, try chatting. Don't be shy. Well, and maybe I'll start, Audrey, since you went through this process the most recently of us. When you were doing, when you started your application, what did you think was the most important? Or maybe what was the thing that kind of occupied your brain space the most? We're seeing some great things, GPA.
Yeah, I definitely think I was thinking a lot about the essay and what to write about. I was thinking about that a lot. And I was also thinking about, what courses I was taking and really analyzing my grade point average.
Yeah. And I see in the chat, we've got GPA on there. That was the very first one. And then a lot of people talking about essays, student individuality. And that's a great kind of comment there because that is encompassed in quite a few components, can be encompassed in quite a few components. Looks like transcript. I'm looking on my other platform here to see if other people are answering this question. Alrighty, similar things. Great. Okay, so we're going to move on. Which part of the Common App makes you the most anxious? And it may be correlated. You might have been like, the most important thing is GPA, and I'm the most anxious about that. Like the most important thing is the transcript, I'm anxious about that. Or the most important thing is the essay, and I'm really anxious about that. But which part makes you anxious? Which part makes you have a hard time sleeping at night? Activities list. Okay. Yeah. Again, the essay. Transcript, GPA. Yeah, as in previous Tuesday talks, we've talked a little bit about like, well, if you don't even have the grades, if you don't even have the, academic chops, like, is it worth applying And, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Great. Well, okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And so friends, we're seeing primarily GPA essay activities in this chat. There are other components of the application that we kind of always forget a little bit about. So can we take a step back and let's just talk about what are some of the components? Anybody who's attended a Tuesday talk before has probably seen our holistic review talks about, the puzzle pieces. But let's break down some of the puzzle pieces for our audience today. So can you guys mention one of the things that is very much in the Common App, very much something that you look at that isn't on this list of chat?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the first thing that I look at when I see an application is I look at the demographic information that a student is presenting to us. So I want to see where they're from, whether they're in the United States, they're an international student. And then my eyes kind of go down to see what their first language is, because that's going to influence the way I might read their essay later. If they're a native English speaker versus someone who's not, I'll look to see maybe how many, if they speak English, if that's one of the languages that they list that they're fluent in, and then maybe looking at the parents' information to see if the student is a first generation college student, meaning the first in their family to go off to college, or, do they have parents who have PhDs? There's a big difference, I think, in the backgrounds of those families with things that they're thinking about in the college search. So I always start with that page first. It's the first thing you fill out on the Common App. So it's the first thing that I look at.
Is curriculum something that might be, where would that sit? Because there are some questions about, A levels versus IB already. So I just am curious, where would you see the curriculum, and, maybe what types of information would be helpful to you to understand a curriculum better?
Yeah. You can go ahead, Megan.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Audrey, you go first.
I think you see curriculum in a couple different places, right? Where you can fill it out yourself on the Common application, but also in something that your school submits for you, which is the school profile. So typically right after looking at the page that Leslie was just talking about, we'll look at the school profile. And this really helps in understanding the background of what kind of school you go to, because we're really good at reviewing a lot of different types of applications from all across the world and tons of different curriculums. That's our job, to be experts. But the school profile is something that we use as a tool to be able to see the size of your school, maybe what types of courses are offered at your school, and any other kind of pertinent information there. So that helps us understand a little bit more about kind of the academic and school environment that you might be in. I don't know, Megan, if you had, yeah.
Oh, no, that was perfect. Yeah, nothing that I couldn't really add anything about it because that was so good. But I think one quick thing is that we're only looking at you within the context of your high school. So we're never going to compare you to other students at different schools that have a different kind of curriculum available for them. So I think sometimes students might be nervous about that, like, oh, but I only have this kind of curriculum and I don't have that curriculum, and we have a policy around how many advanced courses we can take. So all of that information is in the profile, as Audrey was just saying. So I think it's good to know that even before we start reviewing your transcript, we familiarize ourselves with that profile very carefully. If we haven't already visited your school, if we haven't already, met with your counselors and met with your teachers on the ground, which many of us spend a lot of time doing. So I think it's good to know that we are only looking at you within that context, and we don't expect you to be taking classes that aren't available for you to take.
Yeah, thank you so much for commenting on the context piece, because I think we get that question a lot. How do you know if my school, what do you know about my school? How do you know if my classes, what if my school grades hard, like, and that, a 95 for us is actually would be 100 at some other school, and so thank you for reminding that it's in context of the school. So what if I'm a student and I think my school doesn't have a profile because we don't have anybody applying to the US? Like, we just take a test and go, to our home country's college. What if I don't have a school profile? What happens then? How do I let you know more information about my school?
I think one of maybe the most underutilized parts of the Common Application is the additional information section, which is you can share anything you want to in that section. So that might be a place for you to say, this is my curriculum is like in my country. It's doesn't have to be lengthy, but just give us a little bit of context. As we've been talking, and hopefully you're going to hear us say this over and over again, context is very important when we're looking at your application. So any additional context you can provide for us is definitely helpful. I think the other place that students could do this is asking someone who's writing a recommendation letter for them to also share that. And that's then coming from the school, as well as hearing from you, the student, and the additional information.
I will also say, and we know this because we were originally going to have another colleague on this call, and he is on a plane. And so, I know you all travel a lot and have, historically traveled a lot and gotten to know many, many parts of the world and many parts of many types of curriculum, right? So talk a little bit about how it works in your office. Is there expertise that is happening that is shared among admissions officers, or is it, everybody reads any country?
So, we keep unmuting at the same time.
You go first. You go first.
In our office, and typically, though it can be a little bit different office to office, you will be responsible for a very specific number of territories, so places in the world, and those are kind of adjusted in a number of different ways, but are always based off of where the school is and where you go to school. So, for example, my territory is all the countries in Europe. So it's my responsibility to really understand how many different curriculums there are, and utilize both my tools in the office. And we do have expertise in the office. We have a director of international enrollment here, and as well as tools on the website, on websites, and with other colleagues at other schools and your school counselor, utilizing all of those tools to make sure that we can review each application with as much accuracy as we can. So typically it's not someone who has to know every single curriculum in the entire world, but we really share that knowledge and make sure that we're also continuing to update our knowledge and make sure that we're aware of new curriculums or curriculum changes, because those changes and those trends definitely vary and can change year to year or decade to decade.
So yeah, even before the most anxiety-ridden things that you all mentioned is a lot of homework that the admissions offices have done, and understanding where you come from is a lot of how they're going to understand and look at the rest of the materials that you provide. Was there any other component that we're going to dive into kind of transcript, essay, and activities, because those are clearly the ones that are on students' mind, but is there any other part? Leslie mentioned additional information. Is there any other piece in the Common App that you think people don't pay enough attention to, or don't kind of think about the weight it might carry in helping you understand who they are? Any other parts that we're missing here, or mistakes like not utilizing them well enough?
I would add the college supplement. If a school is offering a supplemental essay, the school is looking at it carefully. So there's a reason why the school is offering a supplemental essay. And I know it can be confusing because a lot of schools don't require supplemental essay, so an essay specific to that school you're applying to, such as like, why are you applying to the school? And if you don't, then of course your application numbers can go way up because it's so much easier for people to apply. But if you are, it's also because the school really is trying to get a sense of whether the school is a good fit for you and if you're a good fit for the school. So I think sometimes students understandably are like, oh gosh, another essay. Well, it's a really quick one. They tend to be really quick. So I'd be like, well, I'm just going to write something really fast here. I might copy and paste from another school supplemental essay. And that's really unfortunate because I think what happens is you could be doing a fantastic job in the rest of your application. But if you don't take the supplemental essay seriously, then the admission office might think that you're not serious about the school, right? So I guess that would just be one little tip that I talk about with domestic students, international students, is that if there is a supplemental essay, make it specific and intentional to that school you're applying to. And it shouldn't be a copy and paste and like a backspace, like fill in any school here, like I can totally tell. And then sometimes a lot, like the dangerous part is a lot of students will, when they do copy and paste, forget to take the school out. So I would that would be my tip, is that putting a little bit of thought and a little bit of specific and detailed information in the supplement will go a lot farther than something generic.
And if I can piggyback on what Megan just said, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I have two of my own children who've gone through the college search process. My youngest is now a junior in college. My oldest is now his first year of med school. So watching this play out at home, watching what they were stressing about, the supplemental essays were like top of their list because they were different for every school they were applying to. And it's not the sort of thing that you can wait until the last minute. Some schools ask something so specific that you aren't going to be able to use it someplace else. I think there's a college in the United States right now, their supplemental essay is, what would your wisdom tooth tell you? There's no way you're going to have that ready to go until you are in the moment of working on your applications. So make sure you leave yourself plenty of time to do those.
Yeah, great advice. Okay, well, let's dive into these parts that are really stressful to students, and maybe we'll touch a little bit more on GPA first, just because that was the first thing. GPA transcript, that was the first thing that kind of came to mind for some of these students. So I think there's always kind of a question of how do you recalculate GPAs? Do you recalculate GPAs? Like, what does that even mean? What about rankings? Is that important? Like class rank, is that important? So let's just talk a little bit about, when you look at a transcript, how much time are you spending on it? What are you eyeballing? What do you want to see? Touch a little bit about that. And we know, you all are selective institutions. So there is definitely a standard that you're looking for. Talk a little bit about what is important to you in that, and what should kids not stress about? Anybody want to start us off? I know it's always like afraid of talking over each other.
Yeah, I really would. I think, well, the very first thing just to say is that we know that everything that has led up to this conversation is that GPA isn't a standalone, or your transcript isn't a standalone. All of our colleges are looking at the transcript, but they are looking at all of the different pieces as well to put together one application, holistic admission. But that being said, when we look at a transcript, of course, we're considering what type of curriculum, and there are no specific requirements, especially at Bates. There's no cutoffs. There's nothing that I would see, no number, grade, or anything that would make me stop reading your application or read no further. So we are certainly looking at all the different courses you're taking, trying to see if there are any kind of trends. I think that's one of the first things. Are you continuing to get better and better as you go through high school, and maybe get to start taking more rigorous courses if that's an option within your school. So as you go through, is there an upward trend? Is it a little bit uneven? We see a lot of different grades throughout your several years, and maybe we're curious about that. But I think the very first thing we're looking at is just an overall trend. And that's kind of how ranks come in. If they're offered by your school, okay, this is maybe where you might fall amidst your peers, but it's no one thing. It's just kind of starting high level. But then there's next steps after that.
Wonderful.
Because I think along with the transcript, sometimes it's helpful for us if you are in maybe an A-level curriculum, an IB curriculum, an AP curriculum, whatever curriculum you're in, that might have some outside testing to let us know how you've done on those external exams. Because in a lot of ways that really is backing up what we're seeing on your transcript. A lot of your schools give us predicted grades for all of those kinds of exams. And I'm always amazed by how on point they are at predicting your grades, but it's sometimes really nice for us to see confirmation of those earned marks on exams that kind of bolster your transcript or kind of lend a little more, if we don't know your high school maybe as well, then we're like, okay, this is what they're doing, and they're doing exactly what we want them to be doing. And this is the type of academic preparation the student is bringing to us. So external exams can be helpful for us as well.
I know this is a little bit different. We always say it depends on every institution, how they might look at it, but give me a sense of time. Like, how quickly are you glancing at these things? Like, how quickly or studying them? Like, and are you going back and forth? Like, are you saying, I'm looking at the transcript, then I'm going to look at the essay, I'm going to go back to the transcript? Or are you like, I can look at it and in 30 seconds, I already see the trend and I'm good and I'm moving on. Can you give me a sense of what it's like for you and maybe people in your office? Or is there kind of like during reader training, like you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to look at it this many minutes? Okay. What can you tell us?
I've always been such a slow reader over the years. It's funny. It's like, I think like, going after like a decade, I would be like faster. But I think a lot of us are very, very careful, thoughtful, intentional readers. And we really take our time to do that. A lot of us have also moved into team-based reading, which is partnering with another reader. And that's something that we do here also. We partner with a reader, which ensures that everything's going to be read with a partner. And then depending on whether the partners can agree or not agree, then it will go to another reader, which we call the third reader. And then depending on how that goes, it could go to different subcommittees. So there can be different like regional committees, for example, like international committees or regions of the country or regions of the world. And then it can go even to another step, which is full committee, which is when, okay, we'd like everyone to weigh in on this. So one file could be potentially read by several different people, depending on how it goes with the partner-based reading in the beginning. So there could be a lot of different eyes on it, depending on if that's necessary or if readers can't agree.
I'll share, when I read international transcripts mainly, I will read all of the students from the same high school in one sitting. That way I don't have to keep refreshing my memory about what type of curriculum is available or what your grading scale is there. So if I'm doing it that way, I can go much quicker than I can if it's a school that I've never heard of before, where I'm trying to do some research to find out maybe what the curriculum is because there was no profile. A lot of people don't know there's a listserv for international admissions officers, and people will type in there all the time, say, hey, has anyone worked with this school? What can you tell me about their curriculum? So sometimes we have to go external to the application to get some of this information. Of course, then that would take a little longer. But if you're reading all the same school at the same time, it tends to go a little quicker, I think.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about common mistakes in the activities. And we have a question here of like, what activities like strike you or like are are attractive to you? Like, and what would be an activity or what kind of story would help you, understand the cultural gap that there might be between the American admission officer and an international student? So we'll start with pitfalls of activities. What's some things you see and you're like, oh, I wish you didn't do that. or I wish you did something, I can't see anything about you. What would you recommend in terms of the
Yeah.
activities list?
I think one of my biggest pieces of advice is when I went through the application process, I think I really treated the activity section as just a survey. I was just kind of filling in information. I was not really thinking about what I was saying or what order I was putting activities in. I was just inserting hours and brief description and not thinking about how it all worked together. Now that I'm on the other end and on the other side, when I can see that a student has been really reflective about all of the different things that you're doing outside of the school, of your in-session classroom hours, everything outside of that, I can really tell when a student has thoughtfully put that together, and maybe put what is most important and most valuable, maybe what you want to continue in college as that first thing, and then kind of moving from that point down. Grouping similar activities together are other ways to be really intentional about how you're sharing this information, and being really thoughtful about the fact that there are some differences. So it's always helpful to have a brief description. Brevity and kind of efficient communication is key. And then if you have any role within that particular activity or responsibility or other kind of thing that you're doing outside of those hours. So that's always my piece of advice, is just be very thoughtful. And we do want to know about all of the things that you are doing that are adding to your growth, or that are taking copious amounts of your time, and feel significant to you outside of those hours. But I'm sure my colleagues have other things to share too.
Okay, so I would say one of the almost the pitfalls of this part of the application is sometimes students use acronyms for whatever a club or organization is called, and we don't know what that means. So in your description, it would be helpful to spell it all out word for word instead of using whatever the 3-letter abbreviations that you call it at your school. I do want to point out, though, we understand as admissions officers that COVID has happened around the world, and that may have impacted your activities. Your school hasn't been in session. You haven't been able to be on the athletic team or performing in the theater performance or whatever it is. Know that that's not specific just to you, that's worldwide. We do understand that. So sometimes what I've seen the last year or two, I feel like students are trying to make up for that and kind of creating these little one-off things just to say that they've been doing something, and don't feel like you have to do that. We understand the context of where you all are. And there's another part on the application where you can talk about the COVID disruption of how that has impacted you. So don't feel like you have to kind of compensate for that in the activity section.
Yes, definitely just wanted to underscore those are great points for our colleagues. And I think one other thing I might add is just sort of the mindset around activities, and hopefully this can be a bit of an anxiety buster. But I think sometimes, I think there was a comment in the chat about, what kinds of activities are like the best kind of activities to have. And I always try to caution people from that kind of line of thinking, because it's very understandable. Completely get it. You want to try to present yourself in the best possible light, and of course. But I think the reason why the activities section is there is it's a way to get to know you better, right? So there's no magic list of activities that we're looking for, that we're like, oh, doesn't have piano, and no, or isn't a president of this club and isn't a president. That's another thing, is I think sometimes there's this expectation that you can have a presidential leadership role in every single activity you do. And by no means is that an expectation either. There's lots of different ways to define what a leader is. Are you taking care of a family member? Are you working a part-time job? Are you doing internships? Like these kind of things. There's lots of different ways to think about that. And I think if we're trying to get to know you more, that's really why that section's there. Like, how do you spend that really limited time outside of the classroom, just as a means to get to know you more? So I hope that is helpful. There's no like ideal extracurricular activities like expectation. We just want to get to know you more in your how you spend your time.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think it's hard not to be like, how do I impress you? You know, it's hard not to think that way because it's a competitive process. So when it's a competitive process, we all want to like impress you. But I think it's hard for us to kind of understand, how do I impress? The way to impress is actually being true to yourself and who you are. And that's a hard thing your whole life. You're going to be dealing with that in terms of how are we just impressive because we are who we are. I loved, there was another Tuesday talk where another liberal arts college admissions officer said something like, I'm not impressed, honestly, like by the activity list. Like, what I mean is like, I'm never surprised anymore. Like, you know, nothing surprises me. I've seen all the nationally ranked or the internationally ranked, or that's not the thing that is impressive. It's the why and the how and how all the dots are connected that help me understand like this student would be successful on our campus and contribute to the community we're building that year. And that's something that's hard because it's kind of out of your control. Like, you know, and I know as students and parents and counselors, like we want to kind of be in control of the process. And the only way we can be in control of the process is really just being who we actually are. So thank you for those reminders of that. I want to let's flip into the essay, and then we might kind of come back to the activities, because I think we're talking in components, but I want to revisit this whole connecting the dots piece, because you know, I think people are like, if I have a stellar essay, I'm getting it, you know, but it's not just the essay. But let's talk about the essay, because it does seem like a big piece, and it's hard, and people spend the most time on this. You know, I think one of the questions is like, do you actually read the whole thing? Do you actually read the whole thing? And what makes you want to keep reading, I guess?
So we absolutely read the whole thing. And we're doing it for a couple of reasons, right? One is we want to get to know you. And this is a great way for you to highlight something about yourself that we're probably not learning about any other place in the application, because this is really your moment to pick one thing really important to you to share with us. So we read it in a sense that we do want to get to know you. We're reading it because a lot of times this is how we're learning. Can you write for our faculty? Are you going to be able to write a paper for a class? So we're looking at some of the technical aspects of your writing as well as the content. So there's, you know, it's kind of doing a double lift in that sense that we're using it for multiple reasons. A well put together essay, we can read very quickly. And I know, you know, for me to take 2 minutes to read your essay does not sound like it's commensurate with the amount of time you put into writing that essay. But if it's done well, it shouldn't take me that long to read it. I should get your point, you know, be at the end, hit that conclusion, be like, yes, now I know something more about this student that I didn't know before. So it is my favorite part of the application, I will confess, and I say that not to put pressure on anybody, because it truly is the one thing that's going to be different for every application file that I get to read. And I really feel like it's a privilege to read all those words that you have taken such care to put down and craft those essays.
Megan, when you all do paired reading, when you do committee-based evaluation, are both of you reading the essay, or is one person reading the essay and kind of giving color to the other person? How does that work?
It can be both. I think what can happen is if the essay, if there's something really insightful or interesting or resonating or concerning, or we'll take, oh, hold on a second, can you read this with me? Can I just wanted to share this part with you, so I think this is pretty significant. So true partner approach based on what's happening. If it's like kind of straightforward and it's like, okay, like this is a really interesting essay about X, Y, Z, we take notes on every component of the application. So just like Leslie was saying, we definitely need to read everything in order to take those notes very carefully and thoughtfully. And so we will do that, and then we'll have like a kind of summary section where we tie it all together.
Great. What should we not write about? Is there something that is like, just don't write about it? It never works out well.
It's so funny because I think I could sort of jump in here. I have always said that there's no off-topic topics. And I think that it can probably depend, essay writing can be so subjective, but I think it's more about like how you tell your story, not like what you're saying, if that makes sense. So I know I've done a couple, different panels like this, and when people are saying, oh, like, don't write about the game-winning goal, don't write about divorce, don't write about like all this stuff, and I'm like, totally understand that, and I think that that's fair in its own sense, but maybe if it's really profound and very central to some growth, some ways that you identify and made a huge impact on you, maybe unpacking that a bit and sharing that is still of value. So I think overarchingly with the essay, it's really about being connected to what you're writing about. I think over the years, I've been so amazed by like the students I feel like are sort of shoehorning or like squeezing themselves into writing about something that you can tell they don't feel connected to. They can feel like they're just like chained to the, like, oh gosh, I need to write about this, and it just versus like writing about something that you can tell when a student feels that like excitement, connection, that like that real feeling of value with what they're saying. So I guess that would be how I would answer that question, but my colleagues may have some other insights that could be helpful there too.
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily a topic to avoid in your essay, but what I find a lot of times is when students are writing about a family member, a grandparent who's been such an influence on them, at the end of reading that essay, I want to admit the grandfather, because that's who I've learned about in this. I haven't learned about the student. So if you are taking that approach where you're talking about an influential person in your life, I think you always need to remember that it reflects back on you and what you learned and how this impacts you, pardon me, more so than leaving the story with us just knowing more about the relative more than anything else. So I think that's one of the things I see. The other thing that I would say is sometimes kind of hard to do in an essay is humor, just because we can't read your tone as we are how you wrote it. Some people are naturally very funny and it might come across that way, but sometimes it's hard to make that come across on a screen when we're reading this. So I would always recommend have someone else read the essay, see if they're laughing when they read it without you interjecting anything in terms of your tone, because sometimes it doesn't come across the way you might think it's coming across to us.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with what you both said, and definitely underscore all that. And then the last kind of piece that I would add is don't feel like you have to have some extremely significant life-changing aha moment where everything comes together and you are a completely changed person. And it's fine, if you have, but that kind of big dramatic aha can sometimes feel forced if it's not true. And just know that that's not what we're expecting. We all know that you have many, many years and many discoveries to come, and you've had a lot of change already in your life. So know that that's not an expectation, that you have a big climax.
Yeah. What a great reminder. So let's talk about kind of all of it together, because it is, we kind of do get stuck on like, well, is this component required? Is this component optional? Is this component, and, whenever somebody's asking me about something, I'm always like, optional equals opportunity. Like it's an opportunity for you to figure out if you need to connect the dots. Like if you're like, no, this is very, very clear and I don't need to add anything more to it, then yes, I don't need to take that test because it's very clear that I am a strong student. So I don't need to take that test. Or yeah, or like I had a gap here and I don't know how to fill that gap. Maybe I should do something else to fill that gap so that you understand the whole me. So, for example, there's a question here about like, do I have to take a certain kind of course to be able to apply to certain types of programs? That is, for a liberal arts college, maybe not as applicable because you all are expecting people to take all sorts of different classes. But maybe some major specific schools, you do have to take some specific high school courses. If your school doesn't have that course, can you guys talk a little bit about how you would like consider that in context? Like what conversation happens just to make people feel like, oh, now I get how the dots are connected? Is there a way where you're looking and you're like, oh, they don't have chemistry? Like, what would you be asking at that moment, if you saw no chemistry on their transcript?
The question I would be asking is, what are they taking instead of chemistry? Is it another kind of academically rigorous course, or is it, I can't even make something up that's not that rigorous anymore, but, just something that seems maybe not part of the core curriculum? Is it another STEM class perhaps? And then if they're not taking the chemistry, what are they doing? What other science classes have they taken? What other lab science classes have they taken? Especially if they're thinking about a program like maybe engineering or something where that's going to be such a strong component of their 4 years of study. So I never expect everyone to take the same curriculum. That's certainly not possible, with all the various curriculums out there. But if they're not taking a particular class, I just want to see what else they're taking. So there's not the expectation that everyone is going to take biology, chemistry, physics, and bio 2 or something. You might have another interest that has nothing to do with the sciences. Well, then you're probably not applying to an engineering school, but your academic interests are probably aligning with the type of programs that you are interested in applying to. So that's part of the connecting the dots, I think. So don't say you're going to be a Latin major at my institution if you've never taken a Latin class before. That's kind of, wow, that just seems to have come out of the blue. So
yeah. Well, that's a good point. Like, and that is an example of like, if you're reading something over here and it leads you to believe something like, oh, this person says that they want to major in Latin, or they say that they're very interested in such and such, and then I'm not seeing anywhere else, like that might raise a little bit of a concern. Like, are we looking at the same person? Are we reading the same person? What other pitfalls do you see, in that kind of disconnect? Like, so focused on one part of the application that you missed, this other part.
I think I might see that when we connect that to the activity list. So if someone's thinking, I'm a STEM person, I want to be a chemistry major, and so I'm listing that I want to be a chemist when I graduate, and then all of the activities are nothing but chemistry related or science related. But then I find out from a recommendation letter that the student dances or they play an instrument or something because they felt like that was a disconnect from their academic interests, and they failed to tell us about that. So, it's not that everybody is the most well-rounded applicant in the world, but at the same time, if you have interests outside of your academic areas of interest, you should share those with us. Don't feel like everything has to point to the exact same part of your application in terms of your academic interests.
Yeah, I think it's like that is kind of a common pitfall where you want so much to like make sure your thread is connecting so well that you fail to kind of tell some other interesting parts of yourself. You're like, I must make it clear that I want to study math. But then, you're also an extreme skier. And you didn't mention that anywhere. And it's a part of who you are and your character, your personality that's missing. So, well, great. So we have 10 minutes left. So is there anything that the audience, like if, sometimes you all are shy, you don't ask your question until the last 3 minutes. And so I'm going to give you 10 so that you have time to ask the question if you didn't ask it. And in the meantime, while people are thinking of their question, I had asked the admissions officers to kind of give us a few words of advice at the end. And we've talked about these. But I think, I'll let you all kind of give any other kind of thoughts about this, about the advice that you gave. There is a question here about, I'm trying to think how to phrase it. I think people are always a little anxious. There are some parents of younger students thinking about the future, and people are a little anxious about whether or not studying abroad is the right option for their children, given how the world continues to shift and change. And so as they are listening to this and as they're thinking, like, do you all have any thoughts and advice on, like, how to approach the college search process, like whether or not how to approach, like, is studying abroad the right option for you? How do we go about that? Like, because I know that even, I'm a parent, and, years ago, my first kind of response would be like, yeah, I want to look at US News and World Report if I can, and I want to, so do you guys have any advice on that front of, like, what would you like to see in 3 to 5 years? What do you, in terms of international applications, and what's the best way for these families to kind of understand what the landscape is looking like and what should they do?
I know it's such an understandable nerve-wracking decision, I think, because there's so much going on in the world and because it is so daunting. I think something that I've noticed over the years for students to kind of like do a little test run is maybe doing a summer campus adventure, so you can kind of test it out a little bit over the summer for a shorter period of time, kind of get familiar on a college campus and sort of get a sense of what it could be like over the longer term. Being able to forecast what happens in 3 to 5 years, what a great question. Oh my gosh. I wish I could tell you. I think we're always hoping to travel. We always, as an office, we're traveling internationally every year as much as we can. And I think, a lot of colleges, including our wonderful colleagues here, are doing that. So we're kind of in it with whatever's happening, like geopolitically. We want to be with international students. We want to connect with you on the ground as much as we can. So I hope that that's helpful too. Like when you get to meet us, when we come and visit you, that you can get a sense of getting some of your questions answered directly from us when we come and visit, and sort of get a sense of how things are going. I know safety is such an important and understandable concern. And I think being able to, if you're able to get first round of virtual visits, one of our wonderful colleagues wrote about engaging with schools virtually, finding out, like, what is the campus like? What kind of safety measures? Kind of getting that first round of questions answered. And then if you're fortunate enough to maybe spend a summer visiting schools that you're really, really serious about after you've done that virtual round of research, then kind of, I think visiting schools in person can really alleviate a lot of nerves and concerns, and kind of getting at sense, like once you set foot on a campus, like, oh, wow, I could see myself here. Like, I feel like this could be it. So hopefully that can help. But I know it's a lot.
I think, Megan, I think like you all can comfort, the international audience in that you still have a lot of international students. and
Yeah.
continuing to apply, right? Like, and I think the fact that I continue to have so many people coming to Tuesday Talks is an indication that there is still a lot of interest in going abroad. And on the US side, we know we're better with international students. We know our communities are better with international students. So we are fighting and advocating for you to be here as well. So I think that despite the news and the media and how it can make things look, I think the real thing for a lot of you is to like reach out to current students and their parents and kind of find out, like, is my kid happy there? Is your kid happy there? Is your kid happy in the US? Are they safe in the US? Are they like, what kind of success have they had? And really talk to them. I think that'll make you also feel excited about the process and finding that perfect fit for your student. There is a question here on the other platform. Beijing has had their September and October TOEFL exams canceled. So I think students and parents are like, do you guys realize, like, do you admissions officers realize the extenuating circumstances that happen worldwide that might impact a test score, a learning journey, and what advice do you have for students to kind of talk about that or explain that?
I think everyone should know when something like that happens, TOEFL sends all of us something that says, hey, we've canceled this. So it's not a surprise to us to hear that today. It's already been publicized for us. So I know there are alternate versions, home testing for English proficiency exams that I would encourage people to investigate if you're worried about waiting until the next sitting for TOEFL, whenever that might be, since it seems a little bit of an unknown right now. But do know that we are aware of what's going on in the world. That's part of our jobs, not only to review the applications, but to understand the context that you're coming from and the part of the world that you're coming from, and how everything, like we said before, COVID is impacting everybody in so many different ways. This is not your fault that the TOEFL has been canceled. So we can't hold you accountable for that. We can't say, I can't believe they didn't take the September test. You absolutely could not. So we understand that, and we'll work with the students then individually if, a score's not going to get here till later, or we might talk about alternate methods of doing, like demonstrating English proficiency without taking that test because it's not available.
Yeah. And there's this, someone has thrown out a question, like I said, for the last 3 minutes, it's always like, but, back to this context piece, earlier you guys talked about demographics and kind of understanding a student and, the resources they have available. The question is, do you hold people to a higher standard if they have more resources? If they're coming from a family whose parents are PhD, professors, are you raising their criteria in reviewing their application? Is it going to be more challenging for the student to impress you? Or, how does that work? I think some people are worried, if you're reading in context, does that mean like you're holding me to a higher standard?
I think a big
it's a lot to throw at in the last 2 minutes.
I think the important thing to think about is that when we see something, it's our jobs to not make assumptions or make immediate assumptions or judgments about that thing. So even though we might see and know that have all the background information about what that might look like at home, we can't know that for sure. Everyone has very, very different ways of growing up, ways of talking about education at home. And so essentially the answer is no, absolutely not. We're not going to raise the standards. It's not going to be more difficult. It's all just about gathering information and putting it together as a background as we look at the other pieces of your application.
Yeah, so the takeaway advice, I think, is, trust the admissions officers that they actually have, your best interests at heart. Like, they're not like, they would love to build a really great class and they would love for you to find the place that's the best for you. And so there's no tick the box kind of thing. It really is a holistic, and it's so hard. We talk about it every week about holistic review. It's so hard to kind of grasp what that really means. But there is this desire to understand who you are, which means that you, applicant, need to be as authentic as possible. Do not just do something because somebody told you it might look good, because it's not going to fit in your puzzle the same way that it fits in someone else's puzzle. You can't just like, somebody, went on this amazing volunteer trip, and so I must go on this volunteer trip, even though I have no interest in this whatsoever. Like, you can't try to jam somebody else's experience into your own just because they found success that way. So I think I just want to reiterate that, because like at Initial View, we're like, please tell your authentic story. Well, great. We're at the hour. And so I want to respect everybody's time. I will hang on here for another 10-15 minutes to answer any Initial View questions. I think sometimes people have some questions about the interviews and the process. So I'm going to hang out here for a little longer, but I am going to let my colleagues go start their day, or maybe take a little nap before. Thank you so much for getting up so early to have this conversation with us. It's such a pleasure to have some seasoned readers and people who understand the process to kind of alleviate our fears. Everybody who's here for Tuesday Talks, thanks for joining us again. We're so glad to see you. We will have another one next week. It will be about interviews, which is obviously my favorite topic. But some admissions officers will join, and we'll continue to talk about the holistic review every single week. So thank you once again, Leslie, Megan, and Audrey. It's so good to see your faces, and thank you for joining us virtually, and we're hoping to see each other in person again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Good luck,
Thanks for having me.
everyone.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so if any of you are still hanging on and have any questions about Initial View, I'm here for a few more minutes. You don't need to feel pressure to stay. When I see people all leaving, I will also go. But if you do have a question, now's the time to ask. In case this is your first time attending Tuesday Talks, you might not know who Initial View is. Initial View is a video platform, interview platform. We interview students from all over the world. And that conversation is recorded, and then you get to send that anywhere you want, any school that you want. And it is a great way to fill in those holes and connect the dots like we were talking about today. And I would love to answer any questions you might have. So don't be shy. Go ahead and you can put in the Q&A, you can put it in the chat. I see someone raising their hand. And so if you're raising your hand, go ahead and ask the question. Okay, so what do we talk about in the Initial View interview? I will tell you that I want admissions officers to get a chance to understand who you are as a student, who you are as a community member. And so there are going to be questions about what you're interested in studying, obviously, and then we're trying to use the interview to help the admissions officer connect the dots. So like earlier when they were talking about, for example, looking at your transcript and looking for those trends, the interview is going to continue to give them a confirmation of those trends. So for example, like you're a math and science person and your transcript shows that. In the interview, definitely you're going to want to be talking about like your love for math or science. And somehow the question might not always be what's your favorite subject, and it might not be what do you want to study in college? It might not be that, but it is going to be something about like, what are the classes you're taking right now? Or what classes excite you? Or maybe it's what's your favorite subject. And so you want to be ready to kind of talk about that. The key thing to be thinking about is like, yes, we're probably going to be talking about something academic. We're probably going to be talking about something that I do outside of class time, extracurricularly. And then there probably is an opportunity to kind of share a little bit about what's meaningful to you, or what excites you, or something about your character. So if you're a leader, which you don't have to be a leader, if the schools were all filled with all leaders, that would be not a fun place. But if you're a leader, or you're a cheerleader, like you're an encourager, you're a collaborator, all those types of things, you want to kind of think about stories that are going to indicate what type of person you are. So that's the, common topics. There are no set questions at initial view. So it really is up to you, if you're a parent, your student, to kind of guide the conversation a little bit, like give an interviewer something to ask more questions about. The biggest pitfalls for initial view is writing out answers and wanting to read them. Please don't do that. Now that all interviews are virtual, there's a lot of people trying to like type something out and have it kind of on the screen or behind the thing, and that's really bad because then you're not authentic anymore. And it's not any different than writing an essay. So you shouldn't do that. You should know your stories. But then you don't need to have a piece of paper reminding you of those stories. You know the stories. If you need to write it out beforehand just to help you kind of process your thoughts, that's a great exercise to do. But then throw away the piece of paper, delete or close the window. Definitely don't read. Because earlier, I think you may have heard the admissions officer talk about, it's not necessarily the content that's the thing that is compelling. It's the way you write it, the way you tell the story and what you learned, the why and the how behind what you're doing. So same thing goes in the interview. It's not so much that I heard a story about Model United Nations, or I heard a story about volunteering with autistic children. That's not really the thing that interests me. What interests me is what you learned from that experience. So and how you talk about that experience. And anybody who's listened to me talk about initial view has already heard the story, but I'm going to tell it again. There was one time where there was a student who was very interested in math. He was not a very bubbly personality, just kind of even-keeled, serious person, but obviously very interested in math. And he had written an essay about math and chess, and it was very complex. And he started describing it. And then he paused, and then he said to the interviewer, "Wait, do you play chess?" And in that moment, I'm like, see, I don't even care that he's a math genius. I love that he's paused and asked the interviewer, "Do you play chess?" Because that shows that he is going to be a good community member and that he might be able to inspire somebody who doesn't like math or who doesn't like chess to still be engaged in a conversation and still be able to take a high level topic and bring it down to the right level of whoever he's talking to. And that's what we want at college. We want people at college to be able to collaborate. If you want to just be a smart person and learn a lot of things, you don't have to go to college. You can learn that online. Everything is available for you online. All this research is available for you to participate in online. But if you want a real college experience, which is collaboration with professors, collaboration with students, community members, then you actually are, it's not so much about, colleges want you to go learn. They don't want you to already be the expert. What they want is that you're going to be a good community member. So you're not a good community member if you're just reading off a page. You are a good community member if you are having a real conversation with someone and you're really actually listening, being an active listener, providing information that's helpful to another person and doing that back and forth. So yeah, that would be what I would have to say. Biggest pitfall is trying too much to memorize something, read something, or trying to jam some kind of answer without really listening carefully and thinking about what you're saying. Remember, the interview is a part of the application. It's not the only thing that admissions officers see. So you don't have to list all of your achievements again. All your activities are on the screen already. All of your essay, all your transcript, that's already on the screen. So you don't need to repeat yourself. What you're trying to do is give a little bit more color. You're trying to help them see, oh, this is how the thread goes. This is how the connection goes. This is how it's all related to each other. Great questions. Any other questions about initial view? There's some questions just about just logistics. September and October are very, very busy months for us. So yes, if you have not signed up for an interview yet, go ahead and sign up. You can sign up for one a little later if you're not ready to do it next week. But our October times are starting to be booked up. So definitely go look for a time. If you cannot find a time, you can email us at contact@initialview.com and we'll make sure that we open a time slot for you. We've never refused a student. We've never made it so that they couldn't do one. We always have times available. Let's see what else. There is a writing sample component, yes. So if you, so when you do the interview portion, it's like 15 minutes or so back and forth. And then there's a writing sample. I want you to take the same approach that they were talking about with the writing sample, like with the essay. I mean, you're basically showing, one, that you have writing ability, and two, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to showcase another part of who you are, whether that be like a creative mind or a critical mind, a logical mind. All those things are things that you can show in the writing sample. Pitfall for the writing sample is jamming another piece of writing into the thing. You need to read the question and answer the question. Another pitfall is like exactly what they said earlier about wanting to admit your grandfather. This happens all the time in writing sample and even in the interview. Students are so caught up in the story that they're talking about all the other characters of the story, like your parents, your sister, your grandfather, you know, your teacher, so much so that I'm not learning anything new about you. So when you approach the interview and the writing sample, remember, now it's hard to talk about yourself. Like it's like, maybe it feels like you're bragging or whatever. You have to learn how to figure out the humble brag. You have to figure, this is an opportunity for you have to tell about yourself. So don't be worried about like, oh no, like I don't like talking about myself. And you have to really kind of make sure your story is clear. People can visualize it. People can hear it and see it. But at the end of the day, we're like, what did I learn about you? You know, your loves, your passions, your cares, your, you know, concerns. Like, I want to know about that. I don't need to know about your dad's, you know, concern or your dad's career or I want to know that you have a good relationship, you know, with people that you're talking about, but I don't need to know that much about them. So that is something to consider when you're doing your writing sample. Just one other place for them to connect the dots. All right, these are great questions. It feels like some of you have been listening before, so you know the basics, but you want to know more deeply how to prepare. I think if you're a senior, you've done the preparation already. Like, you're ready. You just, if anything, you just want to have a couple conversations with some friends and teachers, and maybe record them and see what you look like and see what kind of things maybe you say and like a lot, like me. And you might want to think about how to be a little bit more thoughtful, take a little bit more time before you jump into an answer. But I think you already know your story. If you're younger, if you're not a senior yet, this is the time to be crafting your story. This is the time to be thinking, when I wake up, what's the first thing that comes to my mind? When I go to bed, what's the last thing I'm thinking about? Those are great ways for you to think like, that's what I love, you know. And if you start talking to your parent or your counselor or your friend about a topic and you realize this isn't very exciting to me, then maybe you want to try something new. We had a student who thought she wanted to study economics until she did the interview. And then she finished the interview and said, I don't really like economics, because the whole time I was talking about it, I wasn't excited at all. And when we started talking about anthropology is when I got really excited. And so she kind of changed her whole, you know, path in terms of what she wanted to write about and what she wanted to study. So have lots of conversations. If you're not, I mean, you should always be having lots of conversations, but if you are a younger student, start having those conversations now so that you don't have to have the answers, just start asking the question. Well, fantastic. It's been a pleasure being here with you all. Thank you so much for staying on. And I know for many of you, it's probably nighttime, so you need to get some rest. And if I didn't answer the question, tune in again next week. We're going to be talking about interviewing. But also, if you're like, my school needs to have some sort of information session about interviews, let us know. We are happy to do info sessions with schools. So if you have at least 10 students who will be willing to listen to this talk, we'll do a talk for you. So do email me if you have a desire for that. Well, great. Have a good night, everyone, or good afternoon, morning, wherever you are. And good luck on the application process. I know it's really stressful and there's a lot to be thinking about, but at the end of the day, think about who you are and your story and tell your authentic story. Great to see you. Have a good night. Have a good morning, afternoon. Bye, everyone. Take care.